Hi, I'm John Ruffai, and today we're going to talk about scales. And specifically, how many are there? I'd like to hear your opinion on this, and I'm sure there will be many and differing. I believe that there really aren't that many. Now, I remember I picked up this book one time just to glance through it called The Grimoire. And the thing was this thick, and it had like a million scales in it. I was like, holy mackerel, that's a whole lot of stuff to try and absorb. But I'm focusing on the modes in my other videos. And really, there are only 28 modes. Now that's 28 modes, say C modes. So times 12, because you can play it in any fret on the guitar. But that's easy, you just slide up and down. Regardless, there's 14 of the natural type modes, and there's 14 more of the harmonic type modes. And I'm going to explain this to you. I'm going to start in the most unlikely of places, the whole tone scale. Whole tone is, now if you know the circle, it's a hexagon in the circle. It's every other tone around the circle. 6 notes out of 12. So really there are only 2 whole tone scales, say one starting on C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's a hexatonic 6-tone scale, and it gets back to C again. So we can start on C, or we can start on C sharp, and between those 2 groups of 6, you got all your 12 notes. We start with the hexatonic whole tone scale because basically natural modes, and I'm going to include the melodic minor modes in this group, they're diatonic scales. They're 7-note scales, and they're made up of half steps and whole steps. All the natural modes and the melodic minor modes have 2 half steps in them, and the rest are whole steps. This hexatonic whole tone scale, now, I could easily say, let's add a note in between the last 2 and say, oh, that's a whole new scale. But really, it's not. It's just this scale with that passing tone in there. And you could put a passing tone anywhere, or 2 passing tones. But this is not going to help you to train your ears and your brain to hear and understand sounds. So I would just unclutter it and say, yeah, there's only this one whole tone shape, which could be played in all different positions, and each whole tone scale comprises half of the notes in the circle, half of the 12 chromatic notes. Anyway, we want a diatonic scale like a major scale. Basically what we're going to have to do is move a couple of these notes to where we could get an extra note in there, and that's where you end up getting half steps. Now, as much as I tried, I could only come up with 14 of these, and I'll tell you why. Basically, you've got in a major scale whole steps, a half step, whole steps, and a half step. We have a group of 2 whole steps with a half step, and then a group of 3 whole steps and a half step. All of the natural modes have that 2 whole steps and 3 whole steps with half steps in between them. It's just that you're starting with a different originating note. If I start on the 2nd tone, that's the Dorian, still has the half steps and the whole steps. It still has those group of 2 and 3. If we were to take the 3rd note, move it down, now we got 1 whole step, a half step, and then 4 whole steps and a half step. So basically, you can have your whole steps in a bunch of 1, a bunch of 2, a bunch of 3, a bunch of 4. Once you get past that, it becomes a whole tone scale again. Like I said, I could not figure out any other scales that just have 2 half steps and the rest whole steps in them. And again, same as with the whole tone. You can have a scale like, and that's the regular major Ionian mode, and you say, oh, I'm going to add a note in between the 5 and the 6, and say, well, that's what we call the bebop scale. Yeah, but it's really not, you could say it's a different scale. I mean, you could just take any of these notes and just leave one out and say, oh, now I have a new scale. This is not going to help you to learn and understand sound. And if you learn all the modes, you'll learn what a sharp 5 sounds like, what a sharp 4, so that when you add, or when you hear someone adding these notes in between as passing tones, hopefully you'll be able to hear it and identify it and say, oh, hey, you just played a 5 going chromatically up to the 6. So those are the half of the modes, 14 modes. So you have 7 that come out of the natural major scale that has that group of 2 and group of 3 whole steps. And then you have 7 more that come out of the melodic minor, where we just take our major scale and the 3rd tone becomes a minor 3rd. Now you have a 1 and a 4 group of whole steps. 1 here, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 in between those. And you get that grouping of whole steps, which I'm going to do another video just on the melodic minor modes. That's a whole other thing unto itself. Now, as for those other 14 modes, in these we have 7 notes, 2 half steps, the rest are whole steps. Now, what if we were to put a 3rd half step in there? We could do that and still have 7 notes. What I'm going to do is, in order to explain this, we're going to look at the diminished scale. Now, the diminished scale is an 8-note scale. It's got a whole step and a half step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step, all the way up, whole step and half step alternating, or starting on half step, whole step, half step. But really, it's the same scale. It's just a matter of, do we pick this as the starting point, or we pick this? When it comes to the harmonic, there's only 14 possible combinations with 3 half steps in them. After that, after you get 14, things start to look like that diminished scale. And again, anyone who can point out a scale, it's not, and I'll tell you why. One of the characteristics of the diminished scale is that flat 5. And that gives us our diminished arpeggio, or diminished triad, or diminished arpeggio. So we're going to keep that flat 5 out of it, and we're going to say only the perfect 5th. That gives us 2 possibilities. One of them starts out like the major. One of them starts out like the minor. After that, we have a flat 6, and we have our other half step there. So we have half step here, and half step there. Or a minor version, half step there. So that's your harmonic major, your harmonic minor. Each one, you can get 7 modes out of them. And again, you get really interesting combinations between that harmonic minor and the diminished, where a lot of times you can creep into a diminished just by changing a note here and there, like I just flattened 5. Same thing with the, say, the melodic minor, where you have all those whole steps together. You can almost creep right into the whole tone scale and then go back to the melodic minor. This gives us all kinds of interesting possibilities, substitution, chords and scales and whatnot. Anyway, aside from those, we have our, like I say, our 28 modes. We got our whole tone scales. We have those two types of diminished, or one really, if you wanted to think of it that way. Now, you'll have things with strange names like Hungarian minor or whatnot, where you say like, oh, we would flat to 3 and sharp to 4, we take out a note, we add an extra note or whatever. Those are all kind of redundant. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest something. If you really want to know scales and melodies and go beyond the modes, the whole tone, diminished, and pentatonics, which I should get to that in a second, I suppose. What I would recommend is a really good book by this guy named Slonimsky. Slonimsky wrote a Thesaurus of scales and melodic patterns, which I'll put a link in the description, someplace where you could buy it. What he did was a very unique approach on how to work on patterns of, like melodic patterns, as opposed to doing it as a scale. So you might have, that's a melodic pattern. Then this might be another. And it'll give you new ways of forming melodies, new ways of thinking of how notes go together. Okay, now, as I said, I was going to come back to the pentatonic. Now, if you watch the video on the circle, I pointed out that you have 7 notes in every key. The 2 notes that are on the extreme ends of the circle, you leave those out. You don't have any more half steps in your scale, and that's how you have 5 notes left. That's a pentatonic. Starting on the major tone center, you have the 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and if you start at the other end, that's the relative minor of the key, and you'll have your flat 7, 5, 4, flat 3. Anyway, I consider those, I know there are other ways of having 5-note groups, but usually when I'm talking about pentatonics, I'm talking about those, because there's 7 notes in a key, all adjacent in the circle, and there are 5 notes all adjacent in the circle making up the pentatonic scale. Really, each key has 3 pentatonic scales in it, and you can use any of them as a starting point, so you get multiple combinations of different sounds. Like, say, if I'm in E minor, the standard thing is to do a minor pentatonic, or add a note in between the 4 and the 5, and now we have a blues scale. But instead of that, we could use a B minor pentatonic. It's in the same key. Or we could use an A. Or we could shift in between them. Then you could start to use things that are not in the key, and if you wanted to get a little bit more outside tonal. I'm not even going to tell you what those scales are. you can figure them out. Anyway, I think I'm going to stop it here. I just wanted to talk about how many scales and how to approach this, and is there a light at the end of the tunnel. You could do a lot with a little. I mean, really, if you got one scale and you can play it well and you're creative, you can create an endless number of melodies and beautiful melodic patterns and songs just with that. But it's always good to have more colors in our paint box, more to work with. Anyway, that's all for now. Please like this video if you liked it. Subscribe so you can see other things that I've done and will continue to do. And talk to you next time. Thanks.